What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Penn State Nittany Lions are up next. Before we go game by game and preview their schedule for 2025, let's take a look back at what Penn State did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Penn State. You could see my projection for this team was 8-4, and then my prediction for them was 9-3. But Penn State actually did a lot more better than that compared to my projection and predictions last year. This team going 11-1 in the regular season, making it to the Big Ten championship. Not just making it to the conference championship, but also to the college football playoff. They were just one win away from potentially making a national championship last year, and of course they lost to Notre Dame and Oregon in both of those games in order to have 3 losses, and they also lost to Ohio State in the regular season as well. But this team went to the semifinals of the college football playoff, came up just short against Notre Dame, and again it was a really good season for Penn State, going 13-3 overall in 2024. This was the schedule from last season for Penn State in the regular season, and again they were 11-1 with this schedule. It wasn't a bad schedule for Penn State last year. They didn't have to play Michigan or Oregon in the regular season, and also Indiana if you count them as being a really good team. But you look at their non-conference schedule, they played West Virginia on the road, Bowling Green, and Kent State. Those were really easy non-conference games, except for Bowling Green. Bowling Green actually ended up being a little bit of a closer game, but Kent State and West Virginia, those 2 games were not even close whatsoever. Then you look at their home games in the Big Ten last year. They did play Illinois, which Illinois ended up being a surprise team just like Indiana was, UCLA, and then also Ohio State, Washington, and Maryland. So they played 5 home games last year in the Big Ten. Again, this wasn't really a tough home schedule. You at least had Ohio State and Illinois. Those 2 teams were really good last year. You had them both at home, but you did lose to the Buckeyes there at home on November 2nd, which was obviously a very tough loss. They lost that game by 7. Then on the road last year in the Big Ten, they played USC, Wisconsin, Purdue, and Minnesota. So they played one of those newcomers on the road last year. USC, that was a very tough place to play, but they were able to win that game in overtime. Wisconsin was a little bit of a closer game, and then also Minnesota. Those 3 road games were kind of like trap games for Penn State, but all in all, this was not a tough schedule last year, and because of that, I think that's the reason why Penn State went 11-1 last year. Here's a look at the schedule for this season in 2025. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Penn State will play in the non-conference this year. So this is their non-conference schedule, and it's a really easy non-conference schedule this season. Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. Last year's non-conference schedule wasn't tough, but this is definitely a very easier non-conference schedule compared to last year and definitely the last couple of seasons. But yeah, you couldn't really ask for a better non-conference schedule if you're a Penn State fan. Nevada, FIU, and Villanova, definitely games where Penn State will be big favorites in, and then also definitely winnable games as well. So yeah, non-conference schedule not so tough at all for Penn State. Let's now get into their conference schedules. We'll start with the home schedule in the Big Ten. They will play 4 home games this year in the conference. They'll play Oregon, Northwestern, Indiana, and Nebraska. So they played Oregon last year in the Big Ten Championship, but did not play Indiana at all last season. But they get a couple of those games this year. They will play them both at home, which I honestly think is really good news because you don't want to play those 2 teams on the road. Indiana, again, was a very big surprise last year. Oregon, definitely the winner of the Big Ten from last season. And you like to have that game at home. That's a revenge game there for Penn State after losing the Big Ten Championship. And then Northwestern and Nebraska on the other side. Those are 2 games where I think Penn State will be big favorites in because they're both playing at home. And Nebraska, they've been up and down, but Northwestern wasn't really good last year. So that's your home conference schedule. Let's now look at the away schedule in the conference. They will play 5 road games this year. UCLA on the road, Iowa on the road, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Rutgers. So these road games right here, UCLA, Michigan State, and Rutgers, those are very winnable games on the road. Iowa and Ohio State will be really tricky, though. Iowa, always a very tough place to play. That's always definitely a trap game for some like top 10 team and also like a top 25 team as well. Ohio State obviously is very tough to play every year. I think Penn State a little bit will be an underdog, but it's not going to be a big spread there. That's always really a close matchup between these two teams, even though the Buckeyes have really dominated the series as of late. But this is not a bad road schedule, but like I said, Ohio State will be definitely their toughest road game, and then obviously Iowa is a very big trap game there on the road. And Rutgers, Rutgers has been on a rise now for the last couple of years, so that could be a trap game as well. It's not a very tough place to play, but the Scarlet Knights, they seem like they're heading in the right direction. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go game by game and preview all the games. So they start things off with Nevada here, of course, on August 30th, then FIU on September 6th, and then it's Villanova on September the 13th. So they will play all three of their non-conference games to kick off the year, so I think it's really I don't really think there's any chance that Penn State loses one of these non-conference games. It would be a shock, though, if Penn State were to lose one of these games, but I think they definitely should start out 3-0 pretty easily. And then their first bye week actually comes at a pretty good time. They're going to open up Big Ten play, of course, with Oregon on September 27th. That is going to be a big game there, and of course, again, it's at home there for Penn State. I talked about this in the Oregon video. It's going to be a very tough place to play for Oregon, but it's really good of an advantage here for Penn State. They are playing at home, and they also get an extra time to prepare for this game. So that's really good news there. And then they get to the month of October. They'll play UCLA on the road on October 4th. Then it's Northwestern back at home on October the 11th. Then you go on the road to face Iowa on October 18th. And then their second bye week also comes at a pretty good time before playing Ohio State on the road on November 1st. I feel like they always get a bye week, against Ohio State before playing the Buckeyes. I think that's how it works there between these two rivals. It's kind of like Alabama and LSU. They get a bye week before playing each other as well, just for an extra time to kind of prepare for a physical game. I guess that's how it works in college football. But after that, it's Indiana here at home on November 8th. Then they'll play Michigan State on the road on November 15th. Back at home for Nebraska on November 22nd. And then they close things out on the road at Rutgers on November 29th. So this schedule, it's not horrible, but you got Ohio State on the schedule, and that game, of course, will be on the road. You got Oregon and Indiana, but really it's, about playing them at home. So that's the reason why the schedule kind of makes it a little bit easier, is because you got Oregon and Indiana both at home. Two very good teams, but, they get them both at home. And like I said, Ohio State will definitely be the toughest road game on this schedule. So let's now get a projected record here for Penn State for 2025. This is the scale I'll be using here for their projection. If it's a 1% game in the red, again, that counts as an automatic loss. Again, it's not a guaranteed loss, but it's counted as an automatic loss, of course, with this projection. And you're probably not going to be seeing any games on here where Penn State will be an underdog in, because we know that Penn State will be favored in almost every single one of their games. But yeah, 20% games in the orange, those are going to be games where Penn State will be about double-digit underdogs. 40% games in the yellow are going to be games where Penn State will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown, 6-7 points, somewhere in that range. 50-50 games, of course, will stay in the white. Those are really games that can go either way. 60% games in the purple are games where Penn State will be favored by about a touchdown, 6-7 points, somewhere in that particular range. 80% games in the blue, they're also counted as wins, but they'll be favored by double digits as well. And then 99% games in the green, that's your automatic wins. Not a guaranteed win, like I mentioned with the red games, are the guaranteed loss, but it's counted as an automatic win with these projections. So that's what we'll start with. We'll start with the easy wins here for Penn State. I think you got 4 of them on here in the green. That's your 3 non-conference games: Nevada, FIU, Villanova. And then one Big Ten game on here, Northwestern on October 11th. I think Penn State will be favored in that game as well by more than 3 touchdowns. I think they definitely should be able to take care of business in their non-conference games. Those are definitely over that 95% mark, from 95 to 99%. And then, of course, Northwestern, that is probably at 90 to like 94%, to be honest, because that's a Big Ten opponent. But they should be favored in that, game right there. Northwestern obviously was not a really good team last year. Again, this is kind of based off of the talent of the teams, and then also based off of how the teams finished from last year. So All 4 of these games, I think Penn State definitely will take care of business. Again, they're counted as automatic wins in this projection, but again, it's not a guaranteed win. It's just basically an automatic win just based off of this projection. So 4 games, I think Penn State gets your automatic wins. Let's now go on to the next percentage. The games where Penn State will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. I think you've got 3 of them on here in the blue. UCLA and Michigan State both on the road, and then Nebraska, of course, at home. UCLA and Michigan State, 2 teams that did not make it to a bowl game last year, but these are 2 teams, they're both on the road, so that's the reason why they're both in the blue. I was really close to putting both of them in the purple, but Penn State definitely overall is the better team compared to both of those teams, and I think they'll definitely be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. Nebraska, Nebraska was really close to being in the green, but they were a pretty average team last year that made it to a bowl game, so I'm going to put that one in the blue for right now. If it was on the road at Nebraska, I would definitely put it here in the purple, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the blue for right now. So I think all 3 of these games, Penn State will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points. We now go to the purple games where I think Penn State will be favored by 6 or 7 points. And I got a couple of them on here, Iowa on the road and then Rutgers also on the road. So like I mentioned earlier, Iowa is always a very tough place to play. That's always a very tough environment to play in. They've been up and down now for like several years now, but this will be a pretty tough game. I'm not going to lie, it's going to be a very tough game. Again, it's on the road, very tough place to play, but I think Penn State will still be favored by 6 or 7 points, also known as a touchdown if you count it that way, but Rutgers, you're probably thinking, why are the Rutgers here in the purple? Well, it's because this is a program that's been on the rise for the last couple years, and plus, this one is on the road. It's also a little bit tricky because it's at the end of the season, and you never know, some team probably does slip up here at the end of the year. That can cost you a playoff spot, and then also it can cost you a Big Ten Conference championship. But I think both of these teams, Penn State definitely is a lot more better than them compared. I mean, Iowa is a physical team, but I think Penn State definitely is a little bit more talented. So yeah, both of these games, I think Penn State will be favored by 6 or 7 points, by about a touchdown, somewhere in that particular range. And then that leaves you with 3 50-50 games. Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. These are all games that I think can really go either way. Penn State gets a couple of them at home, like I mentioned, with Oregon and Indiana. And then you got Ohio State on the road. So maybe they're favored in both of their home games by 3 or lesser points, and then Ohio State, they're probably an underdog there by 4 or lesser points, probably somewhere in that particular range. So yeah, Ohio State will definitely be a tough one on the road, but Indiana and Oregon are also not going to be easy games, just because they're at home. I think these are pretty even matchups in my opinion. So yeah, Penn State I think will be, I think those are your 50-50 games that really can go either way. So what does the projection come out to be just based off of how tough this schedule is? Well, we count the green games as automatic wins, the blue games also as wins, then you average out the purple games at 60%, and then also you average out the 50-50 games, you also split them. Let's say they win like 2 out of these 3 50-50 games, and then they also are going to probably slip up in one of those purple games at Iowa or Rutgers. That's going to give you a projection of 10-2. So that's how the projection came out to be. I think worst case scenario would probably have to be 9-3, 11-1, just like last year would probably have to be the best case scenario. Again, I don't really think Penn State can go undefeated with this type of schedule. Like I said, they could probably lose to Oregon, they could probably lose to Ohio State, but they probably can win against Indiana and Rutgers. But I think they're going to probably lose one of those purple games. Again, I think they'll probably slip up in some of them. You have to split those 50-50 games with the purple games in order to kind of get an accurate projection. So that's how it came out to be 10-2. So yeah, Penn State I think will probably split those 50-50 games. They at least win 2 of them, but then they lose one of those 50-50 games, and then of course you lose one of those purple games as well. That's how the projected record came out to be 10-2. So do you guys agree or disagree? And give me your thoughts about Penn State down in the comments below. Give me your thoughts about their schedule. Is it tough or not? Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.